Hi, y'all. Welcome to the Vanderbilt Divinity Dual Degree Information Session. My name is Kay Heffernan. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. And I am a dual degree student in the Master of Education program in Community Development and Action at Peabody College, the Peabody College of Education at Vanderbilt, and the Master of Theological Studies program at the Vanderbilt Divinity School. And what we are doing tonight is convening some current students. We have an alum also with us, all within the dual degree sort of network, the nebulous that exists in and around Vanderbilt. And so we're going to talk a little bit about our experiences, things that we wish we had known going in, any advice for those of you who may be watching now, or folks who may be watching later on. We're hoping to build out more resources for dual degree students, both current and prospective. So also know that we are your resources. I'll definitely be able to link us to some information about how to get more information about dual degree programs now, but as reminders at the end of this broadcast. So when we think about dual degree programs, sometimes there's a misconception around it being what maybe an undergrad you've heard as a double major. So dual degree programs offer the benefit for graduate and professional students to acquire 2 degrees at different degree granting schools within an institution, and often shaves off time such that the schools, the partner schools in that dual degree program agree to transfer credits or accept credits from both of the schools. So what this means is that you aren't graduating with 1 degree that is, say, both education and theological studies, but you are leaving with 2 degrees, which certainly gives a lot of vocational flexibility and, of course, interest and lots of broadening horizons in job prospects as well. So we're all clear. The schools that do offer dual degree programs at Vanderbilt are the Owen Graduate School of Management, Peabody College of Education and Human Development, the School of Nursing, the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, and the Vanderbilt Law School. Why might people be interested in a dual degree program? Well, again, we're going to get into that. But 2, I would say, buckets I hear very common is that folks interested in dual degree programs are interested in ethical, effective, and sustainable community change. So being able to talk sort of with the language and use the perspectives of different schools can really help with that. But also being a part of an academic learning and work community that is socially engaged, academically committed, and ethically motivated. I think those are 2 pretty good reasons if you ask me. So dual degree programs of study, they vary very often, and they reflect a multidisciplinary breadth of academic interests and vocational goals. And as I mentioned, the schools tend to count credits between the 2. But something to keep in mind is that admission to the dual degree programs requires separate application and admission to both schools. So as such, financial aid will be awarded and administered by each school separately. And with all of that, I can talk, but I don't often like to. I want to introduce our panelists very briefly and sort of let them introduce themselves. But before I do that, a general layout for our conversation. I have some questions for our panelists tonight, and we're going to talk about them. And then we'll be able to open up some space to turn it over to audience questions if there are any. Questions can be posted on the streaming platforms, and we will make sure that I see them and I can bring them into the conversation. But any questions that don't get addressed can be addressed in follow-up contact, either with the Divinity School as your main point or by contacting any of the graduate schools who also host the dual degree programs. Whew, okay, all of that said, let's bring on our panelists, please. And I'm all about folks introducing themselves so you can be known and heard as you want to be. But as you are introducing yourself, and we'll sort of see who's called to start first, if you could share your name, your pronouns, the degree programs you are or were a part of, and maybe to start it off, just like an anecdote or a memory, maybe even a current experience that illustrates something that was meaningful or is meaningful to you as a dual degree student. So this could be something like a field experience, a mentor, or a collaboration, maybe even a vocational outcome that you're pursuing or continuing to like suss out. Okay, so there's a lot to start off here: name, programs, and pronouns, and then anything you want to kick us off with to offer. So who is feeling like they want to take the floor first?
I can start.
Awesome. Yes, please, Sarah. Thanks.
I'm Sarah Green. I use she, her pronouns. I graduated in 2016 with a Master's of Divinity and a Master's in Education in the Community Development and Action Program. And the image that's coming to me about the how is that I was actually the first student who did both. And so I remember being in Dr. Snar's office, just like with the pen and the paper and the credit hours. And it was a incredibly creative process. But in that, it really challenged me to think about, what do I want from my education that I may or may not be getting in one place or the other. And it was really a conversation. And I like to think that both schools learned a lot about what their students are coming for through that process. And now I work for the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is a pretty large nonprofit. And so I'm experiencing that the skills that I got at Peabody help me to navigate the structure, and that my theological degree helps me to move with alignment in the content and the language. And not everyone can do that. And it speaks when you glance around and see who's around in the work long term, the people who can navigate both. It's good to be here. Thanks, Kate, for setting this up.
Yeah, so powerful, Sarah. I didn't know we were in the midst of like the start of it all. Oh my gosh. Amazing. So yeah, thank you. There's so much I wanted to ask you about, and I want Taryn and Arthur to also get chances to introduce themselves. So which one of you are going to go next?
I am happy to jump in. I am a current student, so I started a master's in theological studies last year in 2020, and then I am currently in my master's in science of nursing program, and then I will jump back over and finish my theological degree next year. So I have a little bit less resolved experiences. I'm definitely still in the midst of it, but I really went in because I was a nurse for about 7 years prior to starting my degree, and loved being a nurse, and then was really pursuing that degree at Vanderbilt. But along my nursing journey, I had really gotten passionate about global healthcare and really wanting to develop really sustainable solutions in the long term. I'd been part of some great work overseas, working with different disparities in global healthcare and then locally as well, but was feeling like what was going on was a little bit more short-sighted and not quite possible to really exist in this long-term sustainable way. And I felt like a lot of cultures and contexts could have been better utilized in their own healthcare, so we could equip and empower people on the ground, opposed to sort of doing these more short-term solutions. And so I was already sort of thinking about that, but I wasn't pursuing a theological degree at that time. It was something I was working through my own brain. And then as I was applying to the nursing school at Vanderbilt, I saw that they offered the degree program, and I was like, there is no way that anybody in the theological studies program is going to look at someone who's only ever taken science classes and be like, come along. And somehow I got in, which is still just as much a shock to me as anyone. And then I spent all of last year working on that degree, which was super, super fascinating to me, to really what I would say is I always thought that I was sort of a nurse first, and then I had all these other passions second. And that was like a secondary part of my identity in some ways. And what spending a year of just working on my theological studies education gave me was this opportunity to really redefine my own identity in that, and really empowered me even in thinking that one isn't greater than the other in the sort of dual degree mindset of just saying, hey, the way that we think about things theologically and the way that we broadly look at our own even like fields, even if they seem totally contrasting, aren't contrasting at all. They actually really complement each other. And so that is something that I feel like I'm still stepping into and learning, but what made me super interested. In the long term, I'm a family nurse practitioner degree student. And so what I really want to do is work with within like global context and do care for refugees and immigrants, both domestically and abroad. So that's sort of where I'm heading towards. I'll keep you updated if it works out.
Yeah, that ongoing discernment is so real. And I feel like that resonates with all of us on this call. So I'm excited to talk more about that. I really appreciate you sharing that, Taryn. All right, Arthur, give it to us.
I'm here. Excuse my voice. I'm getting over some sickness here, but I'm excited to be here again. My name is Arthur Butler. I use the he series pronouns, and I am a dual degree student, MDiv and the CDA program, currently on the last leg, which actually is kind of the first leg for some, but I'm on the last leg of both programs. I entered the program in their spring semester. So like with a cohort that came in, I came in on their second semester, and I am finishing on the cohort that just came in on their first. And that experience itself, experiencing both communities, along with the Divinity community, has been very insightful. Leaving, I went to undergrad at Hampton University. I grew up in ministry. I love ministry. I've seen what ministry can do on its best leg. And I also see what it can do on its worst. And I think I've always been interested in the dual degree program. I tell everybody I was actually headed to Duke to get a dual degree in divinity and sociology. And I came to Vanderbilt on a wing, and I was like, this is the place for me, but didn't really have time and energy to do the GRE. And I was in a reading course with Professor Victor Anderson and three of my other colleagues, if y'all familiar, Eric, Christian, and Quentin. And we were doing the sociology of the Black church, looking at mega churches and programming and outreach. And that really blew my mind. And I was introduced to the work of Professor Sandra Barnes. And she is a professor over in the Peabody College. And she really just opened up my mind to the possibility, the lacking and the possibility of the Black churches, outreach programs, initiatives, sustainability. And that really just gave me, okay, I'm about to graduate. And I was like, look, Dean Judge, is this possible for me? I know this will be my last semester. And they were open to it. They never had anybody do it. Professor Suter was open to it. And I jumped right in. And I think it has been transformative ever since. The research I'm learning on how to speak the language, which Sarah and Taryn kind of talk about. There is kind of a language that I want to say most churches do not have. And I want to say especially Black churches do not have, that if they just knew a couple of things as simple, and I don't want to say simple, but things like program evaluation, that me and Kay, we have that class, those tentatives, those tenets, actually, those little things can be so transformative to the way we do ministry. And I think that has been important for me to grasp hold to. And I'm still in the midst of it. I'm still figuring things out, but I'm excited to be here, part of this conversation. Thank you for having me.
So good to have all of you. As I was saying earlier, going to be great to learn about all of you as we keep talking. I mean, two things I just want to lift up already and themes that I'm hearing. One is that, right, I think what brings us to this dual degree-esque work is that we recognize and look at structures that are and have been in place for a really long time, right? Being able to think in a systems or an ecological sort of way, and wanting to do that sort of heart, soul, perhaps even body work of what that means when you live in those systems, what maybe language you might need to make certain wins or get to a certain perspective for change. I think that's really wonderful to hear. The other thing I heard, and Arthur, I'm going to just pull from something you said, I wrote it down, but this question of like, is this possible for me? That's a theme that I hear for all three of you all, and certainly for me too. Like, I'll just share from my experience. I started out only at Peabody, and then kind of late in the game was like, oh, the dual degree exists, and like ethics is so my thing, and research is so my thing. How can I bring these two together? And it is possible for me, which still is like such a delight, and kind of feeling stunned sometimes at how well it works. So I just want to lift that up, because especially for any prospective students who are watching now, like, I think we are all still in the process of answering that question to varying degrees, but is this possible for me? I think the answer is absolutely yes. And who are you going to talk to? Who may be formative mentors, classes, like people who are supporting you in this work at Vanderbilt? How do we identify who those folks are? Just not a question really to answer right now, but a question that's coming to mind. So we have plenty to talk about. I mean, we could just talk about those two things forever. But I actually want to start with one piece that I heard taking cross-listed in the medical school and in the Divinity School, a healthcare ethics course on Tuesday night. And I've never heard this saying before. This is one of the reasons why I take this class. But one of the medical students said that, especially among hyper specialization with physicians, sometimes you get into this problem, and he put it this way. He said, if you've been trained to use a hammer, everything is going to look like a nail. And I just thought about that for a second. I was like, oh, maybe this is one of the reasons why I ended up doing these two programs. So I'm wondering, how does that adage like resonate with you as a dual degree student, whether again, you're like farther out in your process or finishing up, or you're kind of new in it? The hammer nail piece is really interesting to me, at least. Anyone want to chime in there? Maybe a little bit about the language thing too. Yeah, Arthur.
Yeah, I could just say briefly, I thought when I read that, it gives me the same, like, it's more than one way to skin a cat. If, you know, it's like, yes, I know how to deliver a sermon to bring change, right? You know, preaching can be very much transformative, and it has been, and it will be. But there are structures and systems here that I'm now knowledgeable of. The language has invited me into this. It's given me more language around my experience. And now I can speak to, okay, well, this hammer can work for this nail specifically, but what we're looking here at is actually a screw, you know, and it needs a different tool to build. And what I like to put it as is we're building. I'm building new systems. Yes, bringing down a lot of older ones and useless ones, but building more. And that's what I think of. That's the language piece, all of that. And I can stop there with my thoughts. I may add more.
Yeah, taking that like constructive approach, right? To have the skills and the tools to do that. This is very much a Divinity School thing, right? Like you deconstruct to reconstruct, or deconstruct to construct anew, or reconfigure. what have you. But that's absolutely, I think, the trajectory of a lot of us at Vanderbilt Divinity in particular, and to see how that kind of transformative and within yourself shift towards doing that kind of building work rather than like tearing things down, which is so important. Everybody has a role in that. But that's been a huge shift for me too. I know I came in and I was like, I'm ready to criticize everything. And I think the theological component to that is about hope. It's about really kind of digging into, when I say community, who do I mean, for whom, where, all of that, but really thinking about, not just throwing words around, what's my orientation to the language. Just learning the language is important, but my orientation to it. I don't know. Does anyone else want to chime in on the hammer and the nail one? I think that's
I did want to add to the builder metaphor that I think of it also in terms of alignment. Like, is it a nail? Do we need a hammer? And also, what's the purpose of what we're building? And is it serving that function? I don't know. I would butcher any more about building than that, but I do know you use a screw and a nail for different things. And so I think lasting change happens when there's alignment in the tools that we use, in the stories that we tell, and then the people that we gather to use the hammer, because there's like in the question, the subject is kind of removed and we're focusing on the hammer, but the person using the hammer is part of that alignment. And so there's something about that. And I think in terms of a dual degree thing, there's a clarity and a playfulness about problem solving. And I know for myself, I have these 2 master's degrees, but my undergrad degree is in dance. And so, and I'm at a theater thing now. And so I think, that feels having a lot of ways of knowing. It's possibly an epistemological question. There's a lot there, but I think alignment captures it for me.
Yeah. Taryn.
Yeah, I would just build on a smaller theme of what Sarah just said, was the idea that like there are hammers and there are screws and there are, different portions to that. And I don't know if it answers your question directly, but something that I think the dual degree master's really equips you for is recognizing that everyone plays different roles, and really seeing that, different people offer different perspectives, and it in some ways liberates you from thinking that you have to own all of those perspectives, and thinking, oh, okay, I bring this to the table, but I have learned so much from just listening to my colleagues who have such different backgrounds and such different things that they bring to the table. And then doing this dual degree program really brings you into, and I'm sure we'll get to this portion later, but 2 different sort of communities, whether that's in Peabody or nursing or medicine or Owen or that kind of thing. And so you really get exposed to so many perspectives, and you just grow from letting everyone kind of play their own part and just really acknowledging that and encouraging other people to play those parts. And if you sort of end up in just one degree, and obviously I'm biased in this, but I think one degree kind of teaches you one way, and then you learn from everyone else who wants to think the same way. And then really doing this dual master's allows you to say, oh, I love this from the Div school, and it really serves me well in this purpose. And then maybe there's something in, nursing that I love too. And those things can be additive instead of thinking, oh, one is better than the other. And really being able to say, oh, maybe I'm probably going to mess up this metaphor, but like maybe I'm the hammer, maybe you're the nail, maybe you're the screw, maybe someone else is drywall. I think that probably plays a role, but like every piece has to, you know, sort of all bring all of their best to the table. And then you can really build solutions that feel a lot more sustainable no matter what industry or field you're in, because you're really seeing, you know, that everyone brings their own thing to the table. And that's such a huge thing that the Div School, you know, really emphasizes, and I think has really served me well in the nursing school. And then, you know, just being able to bring all of those specialized fields that everyone kind of brings to the table into the Div School builds the Div School better. So that's just my sort of sentiments on that.
See, y'all, this is why dual degree programs matter. We can just end the webinar right now. Like, everybody gave such a good, amazing answer that, like, together, right, we got to Taryn being like, what about the house? And that's so, or I don't know, the room. And that's so real to think about, you know, actors, like if we're going to use sort of the language of stakeholders, if we're going to do like from a policy analysis piece, all the way to like the alignment question of, and, you know, thinking about justice issues as well, like who has opportunities to pick up the hammer, who can buy the nails, who, you know, has the wood. I think that this is a great way, or I will just say a great example for anyone watching of how amazing the conversations get. And so with that, I also, yeah, go ahead.
Thing also.
Yeah.
Is we have to talk about debt. We don't have to talk about debt, but like that's a conversation in dual degree programs. And so I just wanted to lift up that, at least when I was at Vanderbilt, that there were several cross school fellowships and opportunities to build. And I just want to, like, as an equitable option, perhaps say that you can just be part of, not just, but you can be part of one of those projects without accruing Vanderbilt debt. So that's all I want.
No, that's key. And it'll be, I think that's one thing in the back of my mind. I know that I'm trying to build out like opportunities to say, you know, you're kind of in your div school stuff and you just really latched on to doing mixed methods, interviewing on, I'm using a very specific example, but like Black women in STEM. And you want to write like a research proposal to get an independent study credit, you know, like all of those things. Vanderbilt has money. And another thing that can be challenging, but also can open a lot of doors, is being in more schools, so you sort of see those opportunities come through your inbox, or you hear folks talking about them. Even also in the Middle Tennessee area, there's a lot of partnership between different institutions, be it MTSU, TSU, Meharry, Belmont, Fisk. Like, this is a great place to learn, especially if you're trying to learn with history really at the forefront, I think, of all that you do, because I think all these schools definitely carry a different kind of history into the conversation. Yeah. And anyway, I digress. But I appreciate you lifting that up, Sarah, and we can talk about that absolutely as well. One thing I want to get to, though, because I know it's a question I get a lot from prospective students, is something that Taryn mentioned about the academic communities, or just the experience, right, of being a part of two schools. I know Arthur and I were also talking about that before we started. And everyone's experience is really different. But knowing that these schools all have, in some ways, a very distinct flavor about them, maybe a certain kind of culture or language, a certain kind of person they attract, you know, being mindful of the fact that, like, we're not trying to stereotype here, but we're just noticing commonalities and linking this to our own experience of these schools. So I'd love if folks can reflect on what that was like to sort of be in two places in some ways, like to have one foot on Peabody campus and stretch it all the way over across 21st to, you know, whichever school you're at on the other side. So what's that been like? How have you found intellectual community, like spiritual community, perhaps social community? Anything you want to offer about that? I think folks really want to know about that aspect of the dual degree experience.
Well, so my class the CDA class that I came in was the largest class they ever had. And it was chocked full of really incredible, brilliant Black women that Peabody was not quite used to wrestling with. And so it, for me, my time there turned into this tension between the space where I was renewed and challenged and found depth and rigor, and the other space where we were doing a lot of work, a lot of heavy lifting, in service of finding that alignment. And so I remember a couple of us in that cohort, we were at the Divinity School a lot. And yeah, there's something about that I don't think you should confuse, because the Divinity School also is not always a place of nourishment and comfort. But that's kind of the dynamic that I swam in a little bit. I think that a lot of the folks in my cohort had imagined wildly different futures. A lot of folks headed right into doctoral work, in a sort of like path of least resistance sort of way. There were a lot of organizers that I was blessed to be in community with, and that are still deep in that practice. And it could be also a game of numbers. The Divinity School has more people, so I guess mathematically there's more folks to find that you can connect with. But it was a question of labor and where my cup got filled up. And I really think that alignment question feels so true here, that we were really trying to hold CDA to account of the things on their website. And I think the Divinity School gave us those tools to have that level of conversation, where at the time the CDA program wasn't there. And honestly, looking back, I'm so grateful for Dr. Suter for like going there with us. Okay, she went there with us and had not a lot of answers, and held space for the ways in which the Black women in my cohort were being harmed, and just the way we wanted people to do better. She wasn't the only one by far, but some leaders can move back in spaces of conflict, but I felt Dr. Suter moving forward. So that's a little bit about how it was like. I'm so excited to hear about our labor and what has become.
Arthur, I know that you had unmuted as well, so why don't you jump in too?
Yeah, I guess I can. I guess we are bearing the fruits of your labor here in the CDA program. I like to think of the two programs academically. Divinity School puts me in a very theological, kind of airy space. You know, I'm up here, and CDA went and gave me a place to put it, and gave it legs, feet, and arms, kind of, and or rather, maybe theological was more the bones, and CDA was more of a flesh. And I think when I first came into the CDA program, we were pretty diverse. It was very diverse, and now in our program now, it's not as diverse. We have a lot of women. I think 3 Black men and I think 1 or 2 Black women. But I think the experiences and the direction in which everyone wants to go brings about great conversation. I've actually haven't experienced too much like it. Divinity School was amazing, but I think without the CDA program for me, academically, I didn't know where to place all my theological reflection because I was really struggling with writing my thesis because I had so many thoughts and didn't know in which direction I wanted to put them. And I had some conversation with some of my classmates the first couple of weeks in I can't remember the class name. Oh, Lord. But they enlightened me on just their past and the possibilities outside of church, outside of ministry, on people impact. We had a couple organizers, and I had organizers in my divinity cohort that weren't in the CDA program. And I think that really helped me understand them and myself better. The rigor was, all the same. Writing papers, the readings are always going to be a lot. But I appreciate Professor Suter. I love Professor Safransky's Sarah Safransky's class. You talk about providing space. I don't know if that was part of you and your group, Sarah, but the way they create opportunity for us to explore with thought and reflection and critical reflection. We pull a lot. Professor Safransky pulled a lot from the Divinity School. We have three Divinity classmates right now in this cohort, and we dig, and I love it. We dig. We go into that well, and it brings great conversation. I know that was kind of long, but
no, not long at all. I'm just like messaging, being like, truly fabulous people who I think have who offer so much generosity and like a continued ethical commitment to their own research. So like Dr. Suter, Dr. Safransky, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me too, Arthur, you're reminding me of taking that community development theory class, which is a core requirement for this particular degree, and having a moment of like deep, almost profound clarity, reading, the roots of like economic theory that it shapes so much of our world, being like Judeo-Christian, but in ways that I hadn't had so like in my face before, and so to be able to take that then into like my ancient goddesses class, for example, and to remind folks like all worship is shaped by experience of the social, which happens to also be about power, money, right? Like all of these things. It really spins the conversation on its head in a way that I feel like I'm holding myself accountable to practicing, not only like challenging myself, being reflective, but sharing the gifts of what it means to be in a dual degree program. Because in a lot of ways, it is a gift, to be able to straddle both, to have that time to like take on those loans, whatever it might be. But anyway, Taryn, I want to hear from you too. If there's anything you want to add about your experience, because you're also you're the only nursing student on the call. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I can't speak super well to community just because all of last year was virtual for me. And a majority of this first semester has also been virtual. So both in div and in nursing. And so I'm not sure how that will shift over time. But what I can speak to is the differences in like the community academically, which has been profound for me, actually. So I went to undergrad and got a nursing degree, which happened during my undergraduate education. And so really all of my undergrad was in science courses and nursing classes. And then starting in the Divinity School was my first sort of jump into graduate education, and started in Div. And so that was incredibly challenging for me, because the nursing and medicine mentality, and I'm sure this is true for many other sort of background experiences, but I'll never forget being in one of my first classes, and my TA was like, yes, there is no like right or wrong answer. Like, like whatever you bring to the table is welcome here. And, you're not going to get points off because you think one way and someone else thinks another. And I come from a background that was like, there is a right answer, and you're going to take an exam, and I'm going to give you 4 right answers. And I need you to know what the most right answer is of those things. And medicine and nursing is very like insert X, you kind of get Y when it comes to certain professions. You follow quite specific tracks, and then you learn education in a way that's quite specific, which is great. I just was studying pharmacology before this exam, and surely as a provider and as a patient, I want there to be certain things that are, definite and set in stone. But learning in the Divinity School way was a shift for me mentally, and writing a ton of papers, opposed to taking as many exams as we take. And what I will say is that was a difficult transition for me, but I think has been so wonderful. And I think I probably have not even quite seen the fruits of that sort of shift yet. But even in just, I was taking something I was having to do, and looking at some essays that I wrote to get into Vanderbilt. And I found myself even thinking, oh, wow, I'm a better writer right now than I was before I got to the Divinity School. And thinking about how, I was thinking about how in global healthcare work and in just probably so many different areas that I'm not familiar with, there's so many components of really needing to share the work that you're doing, whether that be because you're looking for grant funding, or if you're looking to, really engage the community with the work and teach them how important what the work is. Writing is such an essential component to that. And that's something I would have never, ever gotten from just pursuing one degree and pursuing just the nursing atmosphere. And so I think learning how to really tailor your strengths in 2 different ways, whether you come in, like science or law, or, ways that are quite more straightforward or fact-based, and learning how to really use those things to serve a bigger, more broad purpose through learning how to write with more clarity and more just in general. When you combine those things, I think that you find a lot of growth, both like mentally and through academics, and it really broadens even your own perspective. It's a challenging perspective to take on. It was not easy for me at first, and now I've loved seeing those things play into one another. So I just want to bring that into the table, because it's very real, and it's like a really difficult challenge that you'll feel even as you, I'm sure I'll go through it again as I shift back into the Divinity School in about a year. But I think when you take what you learn over in, Peabody or Owen or the law school, and then you bring it in, I think it only serves to be additive.
Absolutely. And I really resonated, Taryn, with how you were describing, in some ways, as you were like stretching yourself and finding new ways of communicating and thinking through an idea. I heard that as being a very humanizing experience. I don't want to speak for you, but I know for me, it's been a very humanizing experience to know that I came in like, full force. I am a teacher. I knew I wanted to teach when I was 8. And now I'm in the Divinity School finishing up coursework. I'm like, am I an artist? This is wild. As I'm, making garments and stuff for a class. So I say humanizing because I think it really allows to go back to that first question I lifted up of, is this possible for me? Sounds like in a lot of ways it's possible for a lot of folks, so long as they're open to that sort of growing edge, right? It's hard to push up against it, whether it's academically, socially, structurally, in a lot of ways for Vanderbilt. Coming to Nashville can also be absolutely a growing edge. But being able to like hold that tension and push through it is really powerful. Thank you all for sharing. Such good like dimensions to all these questions. Y'all are brilliant. Let's see. So we have about 15 minutes left, and wow, like I had way more questions prepared than we definitely needed. I want to get to a piece about advice for prospective students. And at the same time, I really want to know, because I don't think we've gotten there yet, this question, because again, it comes up sometimes when I field inquiries of not only how did you find so like the tipping point, right? Like what got you to say yes to being in both programs? We have some really different paths here. So I think that's maybe an important thing to share. But this piece of why did you stay, right? Because you can like go to Vanderbilt and leave with one degree. That's a great degree. Hopefully you had a great experience doing it. But to take on the additional time to get another degree, when some folks would go like, wow, that's out of debt. And does that even make sense? How are you going to explain that to people? The kind of confusion you might run up against, the confusion you might feel for yourself. So that's also a piece that we can talk about in this time together. Where are we feeling? Do we want to talk about like what got you to stay? What was the decision? Or do we want to talk about advice? Because we could always talk advice. I think this is all advice, actually. So I don't know. I'll just leave it up to the first person who wants to chime in, and that's the direction we'll take it.
I don't mind going first on this one. I'm gonna try to do both with this answer, but I'm gonna start with what got me to stay. I know I mentioned briefly at the beginning that it was the reading course that kind of shaped this direction. Like I've always had this in mind because I want to do some great consulting work. I would love to start my own nonprofit, but the language around change and justice came from a lot of deconstruction around biblical interpretation. And I was looking for some enlightenment around what I was thinking about, broader things, nonprofit work and things like that. And what benefited me, and I guess here's the advice piece, was looking up which professors did what research. I think that kind of changed everything. And that reminds me, I need to reach out to a professor as soon as possible. Because, like, for example, I was in what was the name of my class? But I was doing some research around the digital divide in rural communities. And that was just so profound to me. It wasn't my idea, it was my partner's. I was like, wow, there's actually this large digital divide and what impact. And we're talking about the beginning of COVID, well, in the midst of COVID. And okay, well, this impacts not only these folks, but definitely like ministries and churches and stuff, things like that. And I was so enlightened by that. And I think that, trying to get back to where I was going. I'm saying this because I got there to all this new language through researching what professors were out there. That's how I got to Vanderbilt. I came to Vanderbilt because they had a very large Black faculty. I think the largest at the time when I was coming in 2018. And when I got a chance to talk to all of them, they were very transformative in the way that I was thinking about doing ministry. And the same was said when I met Dr. Barnes. And I think the research component of looking at different opportunities was why I stayed. Kind of went on a tangent there.
What'd you say, Arthur?
That kind of went on a tangent there.
No, that was amazing. I mean, what I'm hearing too is that just like you likely got yourself to Vanderbilt, like even though the dual degree can sometimes feel like, whoa, like unsteady footing, like there aren't population-wise, like tons of us floating around. Sometimes it's hard to figure out like where are the rest of my people, because we have so many, we might be in the course of study at different stages and coming into it in different stages. But y'all have, like, we all have the skills to, you know, like Sarah, you were saying, like, you come in with a bunch of Black women in your cohort who like have likely already had tons of practice doing the work of holding folks to account and continuing to do that. Or Arthur, like doing the research of figuring out where you want to be and continuing to do that and informing, you know, your own research and calling to different kinds of ministry. So I really appreciate that. I know for me, I'll say that what got me to stay was listening to folks. You know, I came in really thinking this is a professional degree, 2 years in and out. You know, I'm here for the ride. And then I started to slow down and listen to how other people who were in the Divinity School in particular were asking questions that made my brain like light on fire in a good way. And then we continued to talk, right? And I continued to listen to, in a lot of ways, that calling towards alignment, that how could I deny that, you know, being able to make that decision and all. But I digress. Yeah, what got folks to stay, like advice that you might have, because we're coming up on time. So really I'll say, let's open it up to anything else that you would like to share that you feel like has come to mind, or you came into this panel really wanting to talk about. I want to have you take up that space.
I think what I want to say to folks who are considering Divinity School and really any of the other degree programs, and to make work in service of liberation, to like get what you came to get from Vanderbilt, and be ruthless. I don't know, maybe a little even like reckless for what you're asking for, because that's legacy building, and it helps to further the project of healing the institution. Okay, look, I'm not going to preach, but it is good work, it's good trouble, and they owe it to you to give, to share the tools they probably got from your people. Give it back to you. Okay, that's what I feel like saying. That it's yours for the taking, and to honor your like skin in the game, to honor what's at stake, about you showing up in your fullness.
Courtney, current MDiv student, said it best. This is invaluable. And all of the yes to that. I mean, that's one of the other brilliant things about doing this dual degree, right? Is that, as we were mentioning earlier, you get to take the lids off of a lot of conversation, a lot of opportunities that are explicit, maybe implicit, or ones that you're just sensing to take. And I think also that when you find that alignment also in your courses or in field experiences or rotations that you may have, when you find that person who's like kind of in it with you, to expand, you know, the folks who are coming along for the ride and aligned to a certain cause or to a certain vision of a future. So important. And, you know, in some ways, to sum it up, like the more the merrier, but not to simplify it too much. Taryn, do you have like any final thoughts or a piece of advice that you want to offer us? Because you've offered so much wisdom also already.
I both feel like I could talk about this forever and ever because I'm so passionate about it, but I also don't know how I'm possibly going to follow up what Sarah said. So I'm both at a loss for words and could talk all night. But I think just like groundedly, I think it helps to share kind of like what classes I've taken, just because it can seem, most often when I tell people what my degree is, they are like, wait, what? And they have no idea. But I think when you say, what made you stay? I remember when I signed up for this, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I might be making like the craziest, most wild decision of my life. And then I remember reading the course catalog and being like, oh, wait, these do play into each other. And so as dorky as that sounds, like almost like reading a dictionary, like reading the course catalog was like, wait, I'm interested in this class and this class and this class and this class and all of these courses. And like reading about different policies in the US and the history behind that, and reading about medical ethics. And I took a course in trauma and how, and we utilized like all of the suffering of the Holocaust with Dr. Geller to see, okay, how did people respond to trauma over decades? And we studied the Odyssey of Suffering, and taking all of that, kind of like you were saying, Sarah, and knowing that I can take all of that in and learn a ton, and you will go into your future endeavors, like no matter where you land. And I feel like there's going to be so many moments when I think back, oh, the way I'm responding to this is because of my div education, and the way that I have the context for this, or, you know, can even just encourage someone in their own journey because of the divinity background, I think is something I'm still really eager and excited to see play out. And the best advice I could give is definitely just to listen. Like Kay was saying, like, I feel like the most I gained was so much in the coursework, and doing all of the assignments and all of that was so great, and the reading opportunities. But I remember there was one day when I was listening to someone talk about the organizing work that they had done in, and why it's so much more helpful to talk about food insecurity as like a food apartheid, and I was like you were talking about mind-blowing moments, like that was so mind-blowing to me. And then I was able to like dig into it and research it, and there's just so many people passionate about so many different things in the div school, so you can just learn a ton just from listening. And that, it has such an impact on healthcare. And so it's not like I went into it and was like, oh, I want to definitely learn about this. But if instead I just can listen to people who are so passionate, who have done the work, who are going to stay in the work, you can just gain so much. And so that has been such a gift from the div community, is just that people are passionate about so many things. I always tell people, if you are passionate about any social justice issue at all, you're going to find someone else in the Divinity School, either who is in your cohort or came before you, that was passionate about the same thing. And so you can learn just so much in the things that you're doing and the things that other people are doing. And you just leave super inspired to go out there and do the good work, to, you know, put in the effort and really create lasting change.
Yeah. Good trouble, right? Good trouble. Y'all, I can't believe it, but we've been at it for an hour. Which I echo you, Taryn. Like, we could talk all night, and also, how do we follow up for each other's shared wisdom? I think what I just want to end on, aside from a note of gratitude, which I will get to in a second, is that there are so many different iterations of dual degree experiences. And so for anyone out there who's watching, I mean, y'all are three wonderful, super interesting, super brilliant, super dedicated people to the work of bringing light and justice into the world. So what I'm trying to say is, reach out to us. Like, I think there's a lot of wisdom that we didn't get to chat with. And please know that AVS, the Office of Admissions, Vocation, and Stewardship at the Divinity School, is really making an effort to get more of our voices and our stories out there, because they matter. And this is really the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, so we hope, work that is going to, change the world, for lack of a better term. So can't forget the gratitude. Sarah, Taryn, Arthur, this has been such a joy for me. I've really enjoyed it. I would love to keep this going, but yeah, respecting time these days, especially when we're virtual, is so important. So I'm going to say a thank you to all of you. I will be reaching out soon so we can thank you even some more. And if there's anything that any of you would like to lift up that you didn't get to or emphasize, again, I'll be in touch. And as we build out more resources for dual degree students, you'll certainly be hearing from me, so we can also just start creating an archive of, again, all of the amazing badass things that we do and that we do with VDS and our theological education, I would say, as sort of a rudder in that. So thank you so much, y'all, viewers, whoever's out there. We appreciate you too. Yeah, hit us up for more info, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay, be well. Bye. Good night. I don't know how to end